الذين يذكرون الله قياما وقعودا وعلى جنوبهم ويتفكرون في خلق السماوات والأرض ربنا ما خلقت هذا باطلا سبحانك فقنا عذاب النار ربنا إنك من تدخل النار فقد أخزيته وما للظالمين من أنصار ربنا إننا سمعنا مناديا ينادي للإيمان أن آمنوا بربكم فآمنا ربنا ربنا وآتنا ما وعدتنا على رسلك ربنا إنك لا تخلف الميعاد إنك لا تخلف الميعاد صدق الله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
son, Brother Mushrah. Let's give another loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Today, the topic that our respected Sheikh and I will be talking about, why am I Muslim? I just want to comment on how important I feel like this topic is, especially in this day and age, when we grow up in environments where our families are doing certain actions, certain rituals, and sometimes we never have the opportunity to question it, to question our faith, and to see, okay, why am I doing these actions? What's the reason behind this? So I really urge all of you to pay attention to this beautiful topic. I really applaud the Sheikh and whoever put this topic together, because I think we're going to benefit truly from a lot from this topic. So let's welcome our respected scholar, Sheikh Abdulrahman Chirri. Ba'ad salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We were just doing our global plan. But the topic that he mentioned, or that's mentioned over here, is not something that I personally chose. It was the selection of the dear brothers and sisters that do work with the organization, and I accepted to take it. Now, it's important to mention that before beginning, we'll begin with Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ala ahli bayti at-tayyibin at-tahirin. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali. It's very important to mention, as a disclaimer and a clarification before beginning with this topic, that the topic is quite a challenging one. It's a very difficult one to deal with because of many different issues. The idea of being a Muslim itself is very complicated, and being a Muslim or a religious person in the West or in a secular state is even more challenging and more complicated to deal with. So the objective is not to give a comprehensive treatment of this topic, nor is it to present solutions, nor is it to clarify the position in its right manner. This is something which I believe would require many courses and many sessions in order to sit down and clarify things and to be able to understand the magnanimity of this topic. It's a very difficult one to tackle, and I don't believe that there is a very clear answer to it. It's something that we live here with, and challenges are coming every day. So theoretically, we have a difficult time keeping up with the pace of changes, trying to resolve things at the root level. Philosophically, for example, the idea of having a secular state, where does religion play a role in that state? And this is not a question that's just posed for Muslims. This is for every other religion as well. You have Christians and Jews and Hindus and even atheists. The question is valid for them as well. And they have to resolve these issues, just as we as Muslims have to resolve it. Now, everybody resolves it in his own way, or there might be collective efforts in resolving this and tackling this issue. That's another topic. But the nature of a secular state, the nature of liberalism, and the American version of liberalism is something that we are experiencing right now. It's a reality that we cannot change, and we might not want to change. It might be, the best for a pluralistic society. This might, you might be convinced on a certain level that living in a secular state, in a pluralistic society, might be the best way to live. Now, again, I'm not giving opinions and I'm not giving verdicts over here. I'm just saying that this is a topic that is very broad, and we have to be able to try digesting and understanding its broadness. Without doing that, we fall into the mistakes of claiming certain things that might do injustice to the topic. It might be too hasty in making decisions, things that are not studied too well. So I just want you to understand that this is a topic that's not easy to deal with. So today we're going to go over the question very briefly. And I'm not going to take much of your time, but what I decided to do is to take the topic in its general broad sense, present it and present its difficulties, and then deal with one issue that was also suggested by the brothers and sisters, and that's the issue of the hijab and what's happening with it over here, and not really focusing on it specifically, but taking it as a case study to kind of figure out whether, because it's something that's, facing us right now directly, it's something that's fresh, and it's always out there in the media. So this is something we can take as a case study, try to analyze it, study it, see what approach Muslims are taking, how they're divided on the matter, and from it we can understand maybe other problems that we're going through. So apparently this is not changing, I think. Do you know? Does it work from here? Okay. No, it's a magic touch. Okay, so the question of who is a Muslim or why am I a Muslim? First of all, what we have to do is we have to be able to define what a Muslim is or who a Muslim is. And that can be done from many different points of view. I'm not doing a comprehensive collection of methods here. I'm giving examples. So throughout this presentation, you're just going to see different examples. You're not going to see a comprehensive list of things. It's just examples. So if you come and a person asks you as an individual, who is a Muslim? Or when you identify yourself as a Muslim, what makes you a Muslim? What are the things that you have that make you distinguished from other people? How do you define yourself as a Muslim? Do you define it from within as a set of beliefs that you believe in a God and in the prophecy of a person called Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Do you practice? Do you pray? Do you fast? Meaning that someone who maybe believes in God and the Prophet but doesn't fast, would he be a Muslim? Or doesn't pray, would he be a Muslim? So this question has to be resolved at the beginning, because without it, we wouldn't understand what Islam is. Because the definition from without, like this question, and I give one example here. Some people might see it as an identity. So just like you're black or you're Latin or you have some kind of identity or race or ethnicity, then you're a Muslim as well. So you don't necessarily have to be practicing. You don't have to be performing your religious duties. Islam is an identity that you identify with, whether you feel like you belong to that or you don't belong to it. At the end of the day, it's just an identity. So is it something that is an identity, or does it go beyond the identity of an individual? This is something that has to be resolved at the beginning. And before resolving it, or without resolving it, we see that there's a lot of confusion happening in the media or in the representation of Islam. A lot of people say, I'm Muslim, but I'm not a practicing Muslim. So are you or are you not? Does that, make you a Muslim? Maybe it does. Maybe it doesn't. Some people believe that I can be a Muslim just by identification. So is that legitimate or not? This has to be resolved on the first level. So, as Muslims, whether you identify as a Muslim or you consider yourself to be a practicing Muslim or a Muslim of belief, we have different kinds of challenges. So the first set of challenges are intellectual ones. We have the challenge of modernism. And modernism is a philosophical movement that occurred in the Renaissance in Europe in the 1500s, which altered the human thought and human history in the Western world. The separation of church and state began at that time. The development of notions and philosophies such as liberalism began at that time. And the redefining of religion began at that time as well. So the state became secular, and religion was not in the public domain or sphere anymore. It was more pushed towards the private life of people, private life of individuals. So beginning from that period onwards, the Western world, witnessed a very big change in its intellectual life and history, something that did not occur in the East. If you go to the East, the Eastern world, this didn't happen. So you have different forms of governance there. The idea of liberalism is not something that exists in that part of the world. It's more of a Western idea. So Christianity had a challenge at that point. Judaism, to a lesser degree, had a challenge at that point. Us living in this world now as Muslims, and Muslims increasing in number, are living a challenge at this point. This is an intellectual challenge. Can you be a liberal Muslim? Is that possible? many articles on being Christian liberals, and there's many articles now emerging about being Muslim liberals. What does it mean to be a liberal and a Muslim at the same time? Religious liberalism, or being a religious liberal. Is that something that's possible? Can I be someone who advocates for a secular state and at the same time be a Muslim, who believes that Islam should be part of everything? Is that possible or no? Well, some people believe it's possible, and some scholars do, some academics do, some others don't. So this is something that's an intellectual challenge that we have to resolve and take a position on. Another challenge is creating an identity for Muslims outside of the identity politics sphere. So if we're being pushed towards creating certain identities in this identity politics world, and our challenge on the intellectual level is building an Islamic identity. What makes an individual a Muslim in the West? Now, if you're in the East and you're not challenging these problems, then being a Muslim in that community might be something simple and very obvious. It doesn't require much of thinking or analysis. But being a Muslim in the West, being an individual who identifies or believes in the religion of Islam, how can I maintain my belief in my true teachings without compromising them or changing them for the sake of the demands or pressure from other sides of the country? Redefining Islam by excluding Eastern cultural influences. This is another challenge. We have to understand who we are as Muslims by following the true facets of Islam. Now, Islam developed in the eastern part of the world. It must have adopted, to a certain degree, Eastern practices. And these Eastern practices might be standing in our way as Muslims living in the West. And this is something we have to learn how to redefine. Now, without losing the core and essence of the religion. But by doing this, we could make it easier for Muslims at least to be able to find themselves in a world that excludes all these influences that are related to environment and circumstances that existed in the East and allow the religion to develop in that kind of way. A fourth challenge, creating a religious value system in a secular value system society. Values such as chastity, purity, modesty, abstinence, chivalry, and we'll get to this in a little bit. This is very important because without creating this framework, without having these values, which we consider as religious values, then being a Muslim and practicing certain things don't make any sense in a society that doesn't have these values or has a very different approach to morality and very different approach to understanding what's right and wrong. So these are all connected with one another. Then we have, after that, we have practical and daily challenges. How can we reconcile between Islamic values and American values? Is there even a contrast between both of them? Some people think that American values are just echoing Islamic values. This idea of equality, liberalism, freedom, and justice. These are Islamic concepts, even though they're American values, but they are Islamic at the same time. This is one opinion. Other people might say, no, religious values are different. Can you reconcile them? Do you let go of some of them? Because you're not living in a predominantly Muslim state. You're living in a pluralistic state. So what decides what's moral and what's not moral? What decides what's right and wrong? Can we follow the Islamic system in the public sphere, or should we adopt a system that's more general? And we're going to get to that kind of system in a little bit. How are we to live as Muslims in secular society? How should we deal with political platforms, voting, etc.? Should Muslims engage in voting? Should they engage in the political world or no? Differentiating between what is ideal and what is real. So sometimes you have Muslims that live in this ideal world. They want things to happen exactly how they believe they should happen, religiously speaking. And they want to impose that on everyone. Is that an appropriate approach to take? Or we have to deal with the reality as it is. Since we cannot do that, and maybe we should not do that in this kind of society, maybe we should have a different approach to things and deal with things differently. So liberalism versus religion. We're going to secularism right now. There are many different versions of liberalism. This is something we have to understand as well. It's not only one notion. It's not only one idea that means freedom, equality, and whatever we think it means. There are many different schools of liberalism, different ideas they propose, different things they say. So we have to define what liberalism is. I'm going to choose one definition, and we're going to deal with that one. So there's three principles of liberalism And this is taken from an article by Sherman Jackson titled The Impact of Liberalism, Secularism, and Atheism on the American Mosque. It's a pretty decent study. He says that there are three principles of liberalism. First one, autonomy, which means individual collective self as the sole authority source of morality and socio-political organization. So the individual is the person who decides what happens in the political realm and in the social realm, and in the moral field as well. Number two, individual as the most fundamental unit rather than the family or community. Individualism, focusing on the self, not on the community. This is another idea that liberalism talks about. Number three, using public reason when negotiating conflict. So when there's an idea that we differ upon, is a certain type of marriage a correct marriage or no? Is a certain type of behavior correct or not in society? Who decides if it's right or wrong? If it's a religious person, he might tell you that, well, we refer to the Quran and the Sunnah and the scholars. Well, in a liberal society, you refer to public reason, rationality. You know, we all have to agree as human beings and use our reason as a source for deciding what is moral and what is not moral. This is what a secular state does, and this is how it functions. So as a person who might have a different understanding of morality, if you're a Muslim person who believes that the Quran is a source of morality, or that Islam has a system of morality, or a code of ethics, how do you deal with this? You cannot impose that on other people. So do you accept that kind of morality? Do you engage the public in trying to convince them through their means that this is what's more moral? Well, how do we deal with this issue? So religion, as a contrast over here, if we accept the autonomy, we remove authority from religion. So in this sense, if Islam says to wear a certain kind of dress or behave in a certain way, because it's imposing a restriction on the individual, and it becomes sort of like oppressive in a way. Some people see that there's Islamic codes of ethics or behaviors that are oppressive to the individual. This is a very individualistic point of view. If we accept the second principle over here, religious practices revolving around the self instead of in relation to authority. So it's how you feel things should be. You know, and we're going to look at an article in a little bit where this was used as a justification for a certain thing. You know, that everybody understands religion in his own way. This is what liberalism does. Now, I'm not saying whether it's correct or not. I'm just saying this is one of the results that it has on our kind of thinking. If we accept it, or if we have the third principle being accepted, then Muslims will refer to negotiate difference on the basis of neutral concepts such as equality, freedom, or whatever seems most effective in reconciling Islam with the dominant culture. You start redefining certain things. You start redefining certain behaviors, certain practices in Islam. You redefine them instead of giving them value based on the hereafter or heaven or some sort of spiritual thing. You start defining them in terms that fit with liberal ideas or liberalism ideas, such as equality, freedom, and things like that. So like the hijab liberates me, in a sense, let's say. You come with notions like that because you care about defining the hijab in that kind of way. You don't talk about the hijab as a devotional act anymore. You start describing it as something that's more about freedom and standing against oppression and facing injustice. These are the words that you start using, and it kind of changes this kind of understanding. Now I have a little asterisk here saying that referring to the Quran and Sunnah, for example, for our moral codes and ethics, does not mean that the conventional understanding of things should not be revisited. Certain Islamic rulings might need to be changed, and this is a process that scholars do. They're always in this process of ijtihad and trying to figure out whether the Islamic rulings are the correct rulings or not. At one point there could be a ruling and it might seem unjust, and in the future the scholar might change that. So there's this fluidness in the Islamic rulings. So this is not advocating accepting the rulings as they are, but understanding that there is this body of authority, scholars who are specialized in this field, that are able to revisit certain laws and maybe change them or alter them to better fit the community that we're living in the time that we're living in. So this is one case that I wanted to bring up here, and I'm sure everybody knows about this. And I don't mean to make this case something positive or negative. I don't want to judge it. I'm not here to judge this individual or judge this specific case. What I'm trying to do is, because it's something that's known to almost everybody, and it was in the media, this is something we can use as a case study over here. We can analyze this and use it as something, and we can defend it, we can criticize it, and I'm really hoping that after, the brief talk, I hope, we can have questions and answers. So the case of Noor Taguri was one that was very famous. She was featured in a Playboy magazine. And this is the title. I took this directly from their website. She's making a forceful case for modesty. Now, this is the title on that page. And let's see certain reactions to it. This is the idea that they were trying to show individuals, that she's making a case for modesty. Now, if we go to the Washington Post, here, for example, there was an article published in the Washington Post, and this was by a writer named Asma Uddin and Ines Yunus. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing those correctly. So this is one negative reaction. So the article itself was trying to propose a good and positive message. This is one of the negative reactions. Now, there were mixed reactions. Some were positive, some were negative. This one, the title of it is Playboy's Interview with a Muslim Woman Mocks Modesty and Offends Women. So basically doing the opposite of what it was claiming to do. I brought some passages here from the article, and we're not going to read the whole thing. I have underlined certain important points that I think are worth mentioning. So here, this article says that Playboy capitalized on a now prevalent trend among American Muslims, and especially American women, to appear normal at all costs. Normalizing. Muslims feel that they had to normalize themselves. So this kind of took that idea of, Noor appearing on that website as something that's trying to redefine and alter the Muslims so that they make themselves fit within the society. That they had to change themselves and adopt those other values that might go against theirs in order to become accepted and be part of that society. So Muslim women especially feel the burden to appear normal. With all the negative assumptions that they face about their religion, they most actively assert their lack of oppression rather than simply living it out in their daily lives. This is a reaction to that. So, continuing with the article, and I'm sorry if someone's reading and I'm changing while they're reading it, but this is on the Washington Post, and if you put the title in, you can find the whole article online. So, Muslim women are not represented on their own terms, but in Playboy's terms. And the process mocks the very ethics and morals the hijab is religiously intended to reflect. Different understandings of what the hijab is. At one point, Playboy's trying to make an identity, trying to present in a certain way, normalizing a certain behavior for Muslim women. And in reality, what these two authors are arguing for is that religion, or hijab in itself, represents a certain type of ethics and morality that goes against the whole idea of website or of Playboy itself. So the hijab, though politicized in a variety of contexts, is at its religious core a symbol of chastity and spiritual connection to God. As one prominent Islamic scholar has explained, I did not review who that scholar was, the hijab is essentially a mode of living that reflects the sanctity of privacy and private spaces. In other words, it is, you can read the rest of it. So we don't have to go into detail about what this organization is about. So this is the last piece we're going to read from this article. This piece also mocks through cognitive disruption. The piece showcases two contradictory themes, modesty on the one hand and blatant sexuality on the other. Two themes that are going in the opposition of each other, creating a sort of confusion in the mind of Muslims or religious believers. As coexisting in one harmonious space to elicit a kind of emotional response that does violence to our cognitive processes. So, again, this idea, they see that this is more damaging than benefiting. Now, Taguri was interviewed by CNN. I tried finding this online. I couldn't. It was privatized, the video. So I couldn't verify these quotes. I took these quotes from a study, a master thesis, which I'll quote later on. And she had quoted these before the website, well, the video was either taken down or privatized. I'm not sure what happened to it. So she was interviewed on CNN, and she kind of defended herself after this article came out in the Washington Post. She said that the thing with that statement is that it makes it seem like everybody's connection to God should be the same. Everyone has their own interpretation and practice of religion, of how they wear their hijab, of what it means to them. So she's bringing these liberal ideas, basically. And I'm not saying, again, I'm not judging whether what she's saying is right or wrong. I'm not here to give judgment here. I'm just saying how this whole thing is going on. Trying to analyze. Maybe she has a right understanding of how a Muslim should be in a liberal country. Maybe she has a wrong one. But this dialogue does exist. This whole tension does exist. So she believes here that every individual decides how he should connect to God. Every individual, through his own understandings and feelings, builds a connection with God. And therefore he decides how a hijab should be, or what is right and what's wrong as a religious Muslim individual. And then she kind of, tries to defend herself by saying, I constantly am talking about the objectification of women, combating the sexualization of women in media today. But me being absolutely myself, wearing what I want, being authentically myself, on the front lines of a publication that's known to objectify women, that's breaking the barrier. So this is her justification. Is it right? Is it wrong? It's up for discussion. So she sees that what she's doing is actually benefiting Muslims instead of harming them, and actually putting Muslim women out there and trying to make them more accepted in the society. Jackson, in his article that we mentioned earlier, has a different position on this matter. Jackson takes a different approach. He says that Islam has overlaps with certain liberal tenets, such as tolerance and accommodation of other groups with different beliefs and lifestyles. So there are areas where liberalism and Islam do overlap. And this is something that we should defend and talk about and adopt as well. But he says that Muslims must view liberalism with a critical eye. This is his position, that you shouldn't try to become liberal in that sense. You should be very critical of it. Muslims have as much of a right to defend the religious doctrine as Christians, Jews, and atheists, among others. This is his approach. So this should not be limited to Muslims, but should extend to every community of faith: Jews, Christian, Buddhists, and Hindus. They all have the same challenges, basically, in this world. And the world is, like the internet is filled with articles about this whole thing, this whole debate, this whole discussion. And what we can do is we can try to find solutions together. As Muslims, we can sit down with other faith communities and see how they're dealing with it, and see how they're defining their role as Christians or as Jews or as even atheists in the secular world, and try to understand how we can come to common solutions. This is the article that I was talking about. This is a master's thesis by Buthaina Hamda, Liberalism and the Impact of Religious Identity, Hijab Culture in the American Muslim Context. So now, after taking that as a case study or as an example, we have to understand the framework that Islam works with and functions. And what I mean by that is trying to build a linguistic understanding of the Islamic framework in order to understand basically what hijab is, or what other notions that Islam talks about are. And so if we have an understanding, if we understand the framework of Islam, understanding the framework of Islam is necessary for understanding the meaning or philosophy behind hijab and other rulings. So you can't take a notion or a concept itself and just understand it on its own. This is a whole framework. And I'm going to show you something that's quite interesting, for me at least. It might not be interesting to you guys in a little bit. So we'll take hijab as an example. Hijab acquires meaning within a set of values, within a value system. It represents notions and values such as modesty, devotion to God, and something like this. Now, this is not limited. It's not limited to these. I just thought of examples that it might be connected to. And this is a web that you can have infinite connections to. But what I want to show here is that hijab on its own doesn't have a meaning. It exists, or it gains its meaning from existing in a value system. So devotion is connected to hijab. Modesty is connected, purity is connected, chastity is connected, jealousy is connected, virtue is connected. These are all concepts that are connected with each other. Once they say hijab, then hijab only has meaning by it being connected to all of these. Hijab disconnected doesn't have that meaning, doesn't acquire any meaning. Then you would put it in another framework, another set of values, it would acquire a different meaning. So there is this one thesaurus online. It's a visual thesaurus, and I'm not I have nothing to do with it, so I'm not telling you guys to participate in this or buy it or subscribe to it. But I've been shown this by a professor when I was giving Muharram lectures, and because I was talking about the idea of this web of words relating to each other in order for them to make sense. So he said that there's a thesaurus online that has a similar idea. Now, it's not the exact idea that I'm talking about, but it's similar to it. It kind of brings it closer to our understanding. And I'm sorry if you have weak eyesight. I hope you can see it. What this thesaurus does is let's say I search the word chastity, okay? So it gives you that, and it gives you the synonyms or the words that are related to it. Like, where does it fit in this meaningful world? Because language is a web that's all connected. So it gives you like different options here: sexual morality, virtue, chaste, celibacy, sexual abstention. Now, if you go and you put a word like, let's say, virtue. So you see, virtue is on the left over there, right? So you click on virtue. Once you click on virtue, it opens up another web. Virtue is connected to chastity, goodness, good, merit, virtuousness, moral excellence, sexual morality. So it opens up another web. Virtuousness is connected to another set of values, another set of words. It's not existing independent on its own. And so you can go on forever with this. You can just keep clicking and clicking and clicking, and it'll show you that certain words only gain meaning within that whole web of different words. So when we say hijab in the Islamic sense, or the traditional sense, involves ideas such as chastity, abstinence, for example, jealousy, things that really don't exist in a liberal or secular society as certain values. When you go to the Arab world, the idea of hijab makes sense because the idea of a woman speaking with a guy that she doesn't know in a way that is attractive is not considered to be a good thing. It's part of their moral system. Whereas over here, it doesn't exist as something bad. So without having those values, hijab itself might not be something very easy to understand, even for Muslim women. When they want to cover their heads, they don't live in a world or in a country that has those values. So hijab, what happens is when you go and, let's go back here, let's say that the idea of modesty doesn't exist in society. You know, you go outside, there's nothing called modesty. It doesn't exist, it's gone. Or you have, for example, the idea of virtue or devotion to God or chastity. They don't exist in a society outside of your house or outside of your own religion. Like you go outside on the street, you don't find this idea of modesty. It's not a virtue. It's not a moral thing to have. So what you do is you end up removing all of these things. And then hijab stands without meaning. It doesn't have any value. It doesn't have any... So what you can do at that time, or what is being done, for example, is maybe trying to fit it into another web of meanings. Let's say like a liberal meaning. That liberal world, when you say freedom, freedom is connected to equality, the right of choice, and many other different things. So hijab will gain meaning within that framework of language or that value system. So when certain sisters say that, I don't understand why I should cover up. Well, you're missing a lot of different values that are part of what hijab means, or to cover yourself means, or what gives it value. So that confusion comes from there. Now, is it possible to change or alter the whole society in order to make hijab fit and have meaning in it? Most likely not. So is putting it in a liberal framework a good solution, or a temporary solution at least, in order to save hijab? Possibly. I don't know what the solution is. I'm not trying to propose anything. I'm just saying that we have to understand the dynamics here and try to understand what the problem is in order to be able to resolve it. So this is, we spoke about this, redefining hijab and other religious values. Is it being pushed as a religious identity symbol? For example, in fashion nowadays, it's being re-identified or redefined as a fashion symbol or an identity. Basically, for example, this magazine was very famous for presenting a hijabi woman who was presented with even women of color and different races, pluralism, plurality, inclusion, and all that kind of stuff. So what is the message that they're trying to send over here? Are they trying to use hijab as something that benefits a certain market, for example? Questions that we should ask ourselves. This is the last article, and I'm not going to put the whole thing. It's only 2 slides. And we'll end it there, and inshallah, we can have a discussion after, or I can just run away and go outside. So this is an article I found on the American Conservative. A friend of mine actually sent it a few days ago. It's quite a recent one. September 23, 2019. Again, not advocating for the website, not discussing it, have nothing to do with that. I'm just saying this is part of the literature that's out there. How American liberalism is co-opting Islam. So the idea here is rather than attack directly, it's transforming the faith into something more individualistic and materialistic. So creating a different version of Islam, a different version that maybe alters the core values that it has. So instead of attacking it and trying to get rid of it, why not keep it, have it included in us, but we'll redefine it for them. We'll give them an Islam that's accepted in our opinion. So this is something that might be happening, and I'll use this one section over here, which was written by Buthayna, the author of the article that I just quoted a few slides ago. I'm not sure if that's correct or not. But yeah, a few slides ago. She wrote that it seems that for the hijab to comfortably sit with the public square, and in order to qualify for inclusion in the sphere of what constitutes grounds for public reason, it has to be secularized and represent something other than its essential meaning. This is the only way hijab would become accepted in a secular government or country. Or this is at least how they're making us believe it to be. She continued, perhaps this is what distinguishes American secular liberalism from European secularism, particularly French secularism. Rather than a ban on certain forms of hijab in the public sphere, what occurs is a recalibration of its meaning to align with the public consensus in the U.S. for individual autonomy or right to self-expression. This is what she's arguing in that article. She has a thesis on it, about 50 pages, 70 in total. So something interesting to read, an opinion to look at. You can challenge it, criticize it, accept it. So what I wanted to do is share this with you guys and maybe open up the floor for discussion and for future references. It's a very, very complicated topic again, very deep, broad, and we can't do justice to it in one short lecture or speech. But what I wanted to do is introduce certain ideas and topics to you in order for you to be able maybe to better navigate through this whole issue if you confront it once again. And with that, we say Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa ala ahli bayti at-tayyibin at-tahirin. Thank you. Go ahead. Yeah. So within that context,